Hello everyone, I'm Melly Arif, Customer Success Officer at Smartdesc, a charity IT specialist. And today I'm talking with Adam Monnery, who is Smartdesk's Technical Director. Adam will walk us through how charities can use Microsoft Azure to improve their security, scalability, and resilience. So Adam, would you like to start by giving us an overview of Azure?
Thanks, Melly. So, Azure is huge and it could be quite daunting if it's a new subject to you. On the question of what is Azure, if you type that into a search engine, you get one of Microsoft's pages and it will say that Azure platform is more than 200 products and cloud services designed to help you bring new solutions to life, to solve today's challenges and create the future, build, run and manage applications. So this is all fine if you're an organization that builds your own applications. But if you're a charity finance director or you're in operations or even in IT, and you don't build your own in-house applications, then you might be wondering, well, what is Azure? How can I use it? And what does it mean to me? How do I get the most out of it? Azure is Microsoft's cloud platform. So you can run Microsoft Windows servers on there. You can run Linux workloads as well. And you may hear that referred to as infrastructure as a service. So that's where you can virtualize your infrastructure and you run it in the cloud. What Azure also offers, and what Microsoft are talking about with their 200 products, is there's also platform as a service available on there as well. So what they also offer is platform as a service. So this is where you can take something that you would normally run on a server. So let's say it's like SQL server. So normally you'd build a Windows server and then you'd install SQL on it and you'd manage it yourself. What they offer you on Azure is a platform as a service offering, so you can use Azure on SQL. It may be that you're used to installing SQL and you're used to using it and it's fine, but what the SQL platform as a service will give you is that higher level of resilience. So it will give you the failover that perhaps you can't often afford the license, or it's more complex to set up. And there are other services as well, such as if you need to run web applications, so you can get a web application hosting service, and it will be more hardened and more fit for purpose than you could just do running on top of your Windows server. It's likely that you're thinking about Azure, or you started asking the question of what is Azure? What can it mean to me? Because you've discovered a requirement. So you've got some aging servers that you need to replace, and you want to know if replacing the servers is the right thing to do, or can you save some money on Azure? Or you've just been talking to other organizations of a similar type, or just people you know, and they've been doing cloud migration. So you sort of said, okay, well, what is Azure? Is this the right fit for me? So we've talked about infrastructure as a service and platform as a service. So certainly focusing on the infrastructure as a service side of things, then yes, your current on-premise server environment, or even if it's hosted in co-location, it's a virtualized server estate, then you can pick this up and move it to Azure. Now, we call that a lift and shift. It's not always the most cost-effective way of moving to the cloud. But if you're just wondering, if you've got an urgent need, especially in today's times, post-pandemic, and people are looking at consolidating office space, if you just need to get your servers off of your on-prem environment and moved up to the cloud, then Azure can be a good way to do that. You can run your Windows servers in Azure. We'd always advise you to look at building new, so you can go onto Azure, you can build a brand new server, you can set up a connection back to your head office, a VPN tunnel, and you can migrate your data up there and the services. So Azure will give you all of the building blocks you need to create a very modern, a very stable working environment. They've got storage you can consume. You can run your servers up there. They've introduced some cost savings that we'll talk about a little bit later on as well. So it really does give you all of the tools you need to be able to run your organization in the cloud, as people call it.
Thank you, Adam, for giving us that little overview of Azure. How can Azure actually financially benefit charities, and can it potentially help them save money?
The main thing when we're talking about consuming cloud computing services, and when we're talking about cloud computing, what we really mean is it's somebody else's computer. So rather than you building a server room or building a data center, or paying to use somebody else's data center, Microsoft, in the case of Azure, they've taken care of all of that. So they've built the server environment, the data centers. They're taking care of the hosting. So that's one cost you don't have to worry about, whether that's cooling, power, where do you put your server room? Do you put it in the basement where it floods? All of these things you've got to worry about. But what is really important is that it could be a different cost model for your organization. So traditionally, IT equipment, storage, servers, network switching, you would budget to replace these around every 5 years. It will be a capital replacement cost. You'd try and do a little bit of guesswork about how much storage you need over the next 5 years and try and get it all in the right one. With cloud computing, we talk about operational OPEX cost model. So when you're looking at a cloud migration, you may have to look at the way your organization budgets and whether that comes off of the CapEx budget, so it's no longer part of the balance sheet, and it becomes an operating cost. Now, that doesn't have to mean that it costs you more or that your operational budget's will increase, because there might be some cost savings elsewhere in your budget. So are you paying a subscription for a web application firewall or a next-gen firewall? Are you paying warranties on servers? All these things that you may not put on a CapEx budget. And all of that can be centralized and consolidated into what becomes your cloud computing cost. So in terms of saving money, it's worth looking at the total cost of ownership of your current environment. So look at all of your budget lines. What could possibly be centralized into Azure, as we touched on earlier in terms of what it offers? There's many different services you can consume on there. So in terms of whether it can save an organization money, it's worth looking at the total cost of ownership of delivering IT and supporting IT. So look at all of your budget lines, see what other licenses, what other subscription services you're paying for, and can they be consolidated into Azure? Because what you might find is if you just look at the cost of running Windows servers, for example, on Azure, then you put that into Azure Calculator, look at it running for a month, then it can seem quite expensive. But what you really need to do is look at the wider costs as well. Also consider, well, how long are you going to run those servers on Azure? Because Microsoft over recent years have introduced cost savings such as reserved instances. So if you know these are servers and you're going to have the same number up there for a reasonable amount of time, then you can buy these reserved instances. You can apply them to the servers that are going to be running, and it will save you a significant cost whether you're running those over 1 year or 3 years. The other thing that it makes it more flexible with Azure compared to sizing an on-premise environment where you perhaps have got to buy more resources for test and dev, or you build your production environment and then find actually test and dev is slowing it down, so you buy another server, is actually you can just switch your test environment off at the end of the day. So you can build test servers, but you're only paying for when they're running. And then if you don't need them, you switch them off and you save that money.
Does Microsoft offer any financial benefits to not-for-profits in particular?
Microsoft have got a non-profit grant, so they currently offer $3,500 annually that you can apply for. And if you've already got your non-profit status confirmed for Office 365, you may already be using their free licenses, then you should be eligible for the Azure grant as well, so you can apply those. It's also worth taking advantage of the non-profit or charity discount status for licensing. So something that not everyone realizes straight away with Azure is when you're looking to move your servers there's something called the Azure hybrid benefit. And I see a lot of organizations, they look at this and say, okay, I need software assurance. We don't have that. Never mind, we'll just pay the Azure running cost. But the Azure running cost is charged at a commercial rate. So again, linked to the reserved instances that we just talked about, is if you know you're going to be running servers up there for a certain amount of time, do look and do a cost comparison to buying Windows server licenses with your charity non-profit rate with software assurance enabled, which will give you 36 months of upgrade protection, but it also gives you that license portability. And looking at the total running cost over that time, then this can save you quite a lot of money as well, especially when it's combined with reserved instances.
So you briefly mentioned earlier that a benefit of Azure is that physical servers can be replaced. How can physical servers actually be replaced? And what about legacy applications?
Yeah, we talked about being able to move your Windows Server estate up to Azure, and we talked about perhaps not doing a lift and shift. So what we really mean by that is, especially with virtualization becoming so common, is you can get this sort of virtual server sprawl. So you end up with more servers than you really needed. So if you're doing a cloud migration, and again, some organizations end up having to do this quicker because their infrastructure is of an age where they really do just need to move up there quickly. But the ideal way of doing this is to actually have a strategy behind your cloud migration and plan to consolidate your server estate down. So Microsoft do offer you a Azure Migrate tool. So if you just need to move your existing virtual servers or physical servers up to Azure, then you can use this tool. I know some organizations look to move to Azure because they're still running older operating systems as well. So you do get the upgrade protection that you would normally have to pay extra for. So if you're, for example, running Server 2008 R2, then if you migrate this to Azure, you benefit from that upgrade protection. But really, if you're migrating existing stuff, there's a chance, there's a risk that you're going to be migrating some legacy problem. So what would be ideal would be to approach it with a completely fresh look at your server estate. Can we build these new? Do we take advantage of the platform as a service offerings I mentioned? So if you've had an SQL cluster, these things traditionally they're quite hard to maintain and keep online. You've got to have a witness and everything else. So can you take an opportunity of any of the platform services offerings just to make that management overhead that little bit lower for your IT team or your support company? And coming back to cost, that's where some of the cost benefit can be. It may cost a little bit more per month in terms of your cloud fee, but are you actually saving a lot of time? And Microsoft have got quite a nice graphic where it shows what they look after versus what you look after, and compare that to your on-prem. In terms of how would we move our virtual machines up there, you've got the choice. You can try and migrate them up there. You can look to build new and migrate. You can look to consolidate and take advantage of some of the applications. And this is where getting someone like Smartdesc involved to have a look at your current estate and helping you devise that strategy can come into it, because there's an architecture piece to this. In terms of legacy apps, this is something you can move up as well. So you may have an application strategy where you're moving all your applications to the software as a service. So perhaps when you're looking at consolidating servers, actually you can mark which ones are going to be decommissioned. This is another area where it's perhaps more cost effective to move to cloud rather than doing a capital refresh of your server hardware, because you may be buying server infrastructure that you don't need in 18 months' time because you've got an application strategy that is moving everything up to software as a service. But certainly, if you've got server-based applications that you need to host on Azure, then you've got those options. You can run it on a new version of Windows. If it's supported, then you can run it on Azure. If you do have a legacy app requirement for, let's say, Server 2012 rather than Server 2019. But you can run your legacy apps up there, and you may even be able to modernize some of them. So if you've just got a lot of applications and they just need an SQL database as their backend, it may be worth checking whether they're compatible with the Azure SQL service as well.
Will Azure make an IT environment more secure?
It's a good question, because some organizations, they do just think, I want to make it more secure, I'm going to move it to the cloud, and then security is someone else's problem. I mean, that can kind of be true for a software as a service, perhaps, because they should be taking care of the security, although read the contract. But in terms of infrastructure as a service and moving servers up to a cloud hosting provider, just moving it to cloud doesn't switch on all the security. So this is something you actually need to look at all the options. So Azure does have, as you'd expect, quite a comprehensive suite of security features. So they've got Azure Security Center now, where you can monitor what's going on the services, get that sort of single pane of glass over your server estate. But what Azure also gives you, and we've talked about this platform as a service and the different applications that you can use. They give you a suite of things that might be quite costly and time intensive to implement in your on-premise or your virtual environment, such as web application firewalls or next generation firewalls, NGFW, as you may see. And where cloud really becomes beneficial is it can accelerate your adoption of these. So if you've had an audit requirement that says you should put a web application firewall in front of your app, rather than having to go out to do tender and find the budget, if you're running your applications on Azure, or you move them up there, then you can quite easily turn on something like a web application firewall, put it in front of your app. If it doesn't work, you can turn it off and you stop paying for it. But ideally, you put it in front of your application. You've got the rules there. It doesn't have to be Microsoft's. You've got lots of different vendors now provide that service. Pretty much every large vendor in the security space will have a virtual appliance that you can run on Azure to give you that same level of functionality. And a lot of them call it BYOL, bring your own license. So it's essentially the same functionality that you would go and buy an appliance, but rather having a stack of all these appliances in your server rack, you've got them virtual in Azure.
You've spoken a little bit on the security benefits then of Azure. Will Azure make an organization run more efficiently?
Yeah, so a bit like security and a bit like what we're talking about with migrating servers and legacy apps, it's not just a case of moving your infrastructure to the cloud will make it run better. I think if you've got reliability issues or availability issues, servers constantly going up and down, you need to understand what those issues are as well. So, have you got a network problem? So when you move things to cloud, you need a really well-designed and resilient network as well. If you've got connectivity issues, you need to address those first. But certainly, if your organization would benefit from things such as high availability. Certainly, if you've struggled with disaster recovery or business continuity, and again, you may have audit recommendations saying you need to implement one of these. You look at the technologies, it's really daunting. Perhaps you just don't feel you have the budget all the time to turn these on. Moving to something like Azure, consuming these services, it will mean that you can put your servers up there and make them highly available. So there's things called availability groups. Make sure your servers aren't running on any two hosts in the same rack. You can replicate data around the world should you need to. You can certainly replicate between different regions in the UK. And if you've got a speed or performance issue, what is quite nice and where you'd struggle compared to an on-premise environment, if your server needs more, it can consume more resources because your application is resource intensive, you can very easily resize your server on Azure. So you can give it more RAM, you can give it a different CPU and more cores. You can move to a faster tier of storage, and you can do that seamlessly rather than to go out and procure different hardware. Maybe you've got a cluster and then you end up with a high performance server at the side, something like that. So in terms of making your organization run more efficiently, firstly, you've got to understand what the cause of any instability is or any performance issues. But once you know what you need and what you need to consume, then Azure gives you the tools. As I said, with a bit like the security services, you can consume those very easily. You can start small, so you could start by moving your servers there, setting up your availability groups if you've got load balanced applications, perhaps consuming a platform as a service database, so you get the high availability for a database, which is traditionally very hard to manage on-premise. You can start with Azure Backup, so you've then got a backup of your data and it's replicated however far you want to for your data governance. So replicate it within the UK, replicate it globally. And then you've got Azure Site Recovery as well. So if you want that true disaster recovery as a service, you can just switch that on for the servers that you need to. You don't have to switch it on for your whole estate. And this has perhaps been what made it cost prohibitive for your on-prem environment is you size your storage, then you size disaster recovery to back up the whole thing. But perhaps half your estate just needs that good reliable backup that's replicated, and half your estate needs real-time disaster recovery so you can restore quickly for your recovery time objectives. So definitely there's benefits to moving up there. It will enable you to ingest all of those services to make your organization fitter from an IT perspective, but it won't just make it run more efficiently overnight. You've got to understand what those barriers are. Is it your application? Is it your network? Or is it your compute?
Does Azure integrate with other cloud services?
What we're talking about today, it scales from sort of very small charities to the very large. So what people may start to see is they end up with more of a multi-cloud environment. So perhaps you've got your Microsoft workloads running on Azure. Perhaps you've got some websites on AWS. So what makes Azure very accessible is that behind it for the authentication is your Active Directory service. So this is what you use to authenticate against Office 365 as well. And it's how you can grant your users access to any Azure services that use that level of authentication. But what it also provides is single sign-on or SSO. So as long as your other cloud applications support single sign-on, which they will in this day and age, then you can give your users, staff in your organization, a single username and password to be able to access all these applications. What it also brings together, as long as you've got the right level of license, which we'd very much recommend, is you can then use the same multi-factor for securing your applications. So again, rather than juggling all these different authenticators and keys, then your staff have got your single login for accessing things. and multi-factor tied into that as well.
Thank you so much, Adam. That has been very insightful, and you've really highlighted the benefits of Azure and how charities can use it to perhaps work more efficiently and have their IT environments more secure as well. If anyone has any further questions, who should they contact?
Yeah, certainly. So if people want to contact solutions@smartdesk.co.uk, then we'd be more than happy to answer any queries. If you'd like to organise a technology review, which is free for all charities and non-profits, then please drop us an email with solutions@smartdesk.co.uk, and one of our IT directors will be getting back to you.